Howdy everyone, you are listening to Blue Jeans and Boots, where genetics grad students talk about how to navigate a PhD program while trying to stay sane. We also invite faculty from our interdisciplinary program here at Texas A&M onto the show and pick their brains about their research, what it's like being a principal investigator, and their journey to becoming a professor here at A&M. In this episode, I'll be talking to second-year gene student Anthony Matarazzo after receiving undergraduate degrees in biology and anthropology from the University of Florida. Anthony spent 3 years working in industry labs where he helped diagnose patients with genetic disorders and produced gene therapy products to treat such diseases. His current research in the Rimer and Srinivasan labs here at Texas A&M aims to characterize the impact of astrocytic mitochondrial DNA ablation on the neuroenvironment of the hippocampus. My name is Sarah, and for the first time ever on Blue Jeans and Boots, I will be your only host today. Hi, Anthony. How are you?
I'm good, Sarah. How you doing today?
Not too bad, not too bad. So, how are you finding it here at A&M? Do you like it so far?
Oh, I definitely like it. The research is super interesting to me. I'm finally getting to work on things that I've been thinking about since starting my career in STEM. It's pretty challenging. They don't lie to you when they say that grad school is one of the hardest academic things you can do. And it's very different from undergrad and industry both. So I always thought I was going to go to grad school. That was my long-term goal since starting undergrad, really. I knew I didn't want to be a doctor, but I did want to contribute to the medical field in some way, and I feel like a professional degree was the route that I should go in. It was actually my undergrad PI that recommended I take some time off from school and go into industry for a little bit before going to pursue grad school.
Can you tell us a little bit more about exactly what you did in industry? I know we gave a brief overview.
Yeah, so I kind of continued my undergrad work a little bit at my first job. I worked at a company called GeneDx in Maryland, and that was basically a PCR lab that I was working in. We were validating next-gen sequencing results, and that's where the diagnosis aspect came in, where patients with or patient samples would come in with either cancer markers that we would be looking at, or we would test a lot of prenatal samples to see if they would inherit any kind of genetic disease or disorder. And then after a year at GeneDx, I moved back down to Florida and started working for Thermo Fisher in their viral vector services department. And that was a really cool experience because it was my first taste of kind of like clinical work outside of just like a little box, My first job, it was kind of a PCR monkey sitting on the machine, trying to, produce samples all day or process samples all day. But at Thermo, I actually got hands-on experience working with clients who were, small scale labs that were trying to scale up their gene therapy products. So I got to see the more business aspect of it. I got to see how products that I was directly generating were going straight to patients. I think some of the programs had only 1 or 2 or 3 patients that were actually getting the gene therapies because their diseases were so rare. So it really gave me a sense of how what we learn in the classroom can be applied in the real world. That was my first taste of it. And then coming back to A&M, it was kind of like, okay, now I have to go back into student mode after being, professional. I'm a scientist, but I'm also, a negotiator, and I have to, keep track of all of my materials and things. But going back into student mode and actually having to take tests again in my late 20s, it was not fun.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that one for sure. But do you think the skills that you picked up in so many different areas in industry have helped you in grad school?
Definitely. I don't know if it was maybe the time gap where I was able to grow up a little bit before coming back into school, but I do see a big shift in how I view grad school versus undergrad. For sure, yeah. So in undergrad, I was the typical try hard, I guess. Um, I was going for 2 majors. I was working in 2 research labs. I did marching band on top of it all. I was trying to do the most basically, and that was where all my effort went. But then once I went to industry and I got to experience a 9 to 5, industry hours never work 9 to 5 when you're working in a STEM field, but ideally 9 to 5. Where I was able to go home and not have to think about homework or think about the extracurriculars I was doing. I just had me time. It gave me a good sense of how to separate my personal life from my work life, because when undergrad it was the same. So I could imagine coming into grad school straight from undergrad, how you can kind of still be in that, train with no brakes mindset of I just got to keep going and keep pushing through. So I think it gave me a good sense of where my limits are and what is reasonable amount of effort to put into things rather than my 120% at all times.
I mean, I think that's a good way to look at it because, we don't work standard 9 to 5 hours as a grad student. You never do. There's always going to be those days where you just have to kind of pull an all-nighter and make sure that what gets done. But is there anything that you miss about working in industry that you would have preferred?
Oh, for sure. So the structure is one thing. We had very, very strict, SOPs, guidelines we had to follow, good manufacturing procedures, all that, to where if there was any kind of mistake in the lab, it had to be written up, signed off by multiple people saying that, I witnessed this, that you did this, for any step of a process, things like that. And then coming back into the academia world where it's kind of every PI for himself or herself, kind of like, I'm going to run the lab the way that I was taught or the way that I see fit. And there's not really a good standardization in mentorship, I guess. There's not really any of those standardized check-ins. Like I had halfway through the year, so semi-annual performance reviews and things like that, where we would set up goals and project where my projects were going to end up. And we don't really have too much of that outside of lab meetings, which are kind of, we're going to look on the short term, but not very much the long term. So things like that, like structurally, I miss for sure. And that's one of the things that my PI in undergrad mentioned to me when she suggested I go into industry, was that since I am so kind of rigid in that mentality, that industry would be better for me because grad school does not work like that. Experiments fail and you don't know why. You don't have, the resources that a multi-million-dollar company has. So things like that, I think, is what I miss the most.
Yeah, I feel like industry money would probably make a lot of those experiments you want to try out a lot easier to get done. But you mentioned that, different PIs have different ways of mentoring, and you're doing work in 2 labs. Do you find that difficult, or do they work well together with you?
So I think I don't find it difficult. I do enjoy getting both of their perspectives on things. Whereas one PI might want to push forward with the project, the other PI might say, well, let's reassess this other aspect first before moving forward. Or since they are, one's a neuromuscular junction person and the other one's, more of an astrocyte person, they have those different but similar viewpoints on neurobiology. So I do like getting, it's basically a mini committee meeting at each lab meeting, because I have 2 of my 5 committee members there. So I like it in that aspect for sure. And then with the fact that I get to learn things in one lab and bring them to the other lab so that we can, kind of have that cross training going on, that has also been really cool. Because at Thermo, that was one of the things I was really passionate about actually, was standardizing the training, because our lab at least, and our department didn't have a standardized training protocol. It was kind of learn on the job. Get the SOP signed off as soon as somebody else was doing it, and you could watch and observe and then, hopefully show your expertise at it to get signed off. So coming into this lab where it was kind of like, yeah, we use this protocol that we printed off from, the standard box set from 2008, and then we modified it, every year since, and it's just all these, side notes and things. I'm like, we're going to type it out. We're going to have a standardized protocol, and everyone's going to follow the same thing. So I like playing with that.
Well, I mean, that's a good role to have in the lab, though, because people know that they can depend on you to do things to the highest standards, which is probably at least partly a little bit left over from the industry.
Right.
So, but what drew you to the area of research that you're doing now?
So genetics in general has always been my kind of go-to in biology in terms of what I'm interested in, ever since like AP Bio, and I learned that 4 amino acids sequences can code for organisms on a whole. That was super interesting to me, and that was not to age myself, but like back in 2013. So it was like just as the field was taking off of, we recently had finished the Human Genome Project and moving into the other animal models and stuff. So genetics has always been my focus, and I wanted to help people through genetics in some way. The neurological disorders, I really found interesting, specifically things like Alzheimer's, where we don't have any kind of evidence to support what the cause is. I think that's super cool, because it could be one cause that we're just missing. It could be multiple factors that are coming together in different ways. But if we can mediate the symptoms, or mediate, in my case, the amyloid beta plaque buildup and the tau protein aggregates, if we can mediate that or help to alleviate that accumulation in the brain, we might be able to help these people that otherwise they're just, they have no control over it. And I think that was the main thing, was that these people that have these neurological conditions, they just watch their brains deteriorate and their lives, slip by them. And I thought that was super scary and sad. So I think that's what motivated me to go into that field.
Well, being a person who has memory dysfunction, I appreciate it. And I mean, it's nice to be at A&M and, have those sorts of things in yourself and see how dedicated everybody here is to improving that. And one of the things that I was concerned about when I came to grad school was, was there going to be research that I wanted to do, because there's, so many people looking into all the same things. But do you feel like you get cornered into doing particular types of research, or do you have a little bit of leeway in deciding exactly how you want to approach things?
In terms of the progression of my project, I'm in no sense of the word a neurobiology expert. So the PIs have kind of taken the reins on that front. I think once we start getting into the genomic sequencing, we're planning to do RNA sequencing for my project. I think once we get into that arena, they'll probably hand off the reins to me. Their expertise lies in the biology of the brain, whereas mine is more in the, A, T, G, and C. So I think they're ready to hand that off to me. Well, I guess it's you in the case of RNA sequencing, but.
Yeah. But so one of the big things about our program, obviously, is the interdisciplinary aspect. Do you find that to be true here? Do you feel 100%. Like you get to work with everyone?
100%. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to join the podcast, actually, was because I chose A&M specifically because this genetics program is interdisciplinary, and I didn't know where I wanted to end up, or if a genetics major would, be able to enter a neurobiology lab. I wanted to keep my options open and not pigeonhole myself from the get-go, and that allowed me to rotate. I think I was through 6 or 7 labs before I ended up in my final lab, which was super stressful in the moment. Don't get me wrong, that was not fun to go through, but just to see the breadth of research that our program is involved in, and then joining the podcast was I'm able to interact with people who are, not on my floor of my building, or something that we hear at G2 seminar. So once a week, we get to hear from other professors that are either invited from our program or from outside of TAMU to come and speak about other topics that I'm not going to be hearing about in a neuro lab. But on the podcast, it kind of gives me that one-on-one interaction with other people that are doing research is similar in terms that it's got something to do with genetics, but it could be so dissimilar as, I was talking to Serena on her episode of the podcast about her plants and all that, and I'm in no way a plant guy, so it was super interesting to hear about, that side of things as well.
Yeah, I like hearing about, I think seminars probably one of my favorite parts of the week, just because sometimes you'll go to those and you'll get exposed to something that you really wouldn't have thought deals with your research, but it can send you down a rabbit hole where you find something really interesting that ends up helping you out in the long run. So I think it's pretty great. But overall, do you feel like the gene program has been welcoming and supportive of you?
Oh, for sure. They definitely supported my, I don't want to say indecision because some of it wasn't my fault, but trying to find a lab that had interesting research to me and that mentorship that I was kind of seeking. They were very supportive of me not finding it right away. So I did feel support in that sense. And I just think that the gene students in particular, we all tend to look out for each other. I know our cohort is pretty close, as well as people from the other cohorts trying to, improve the program through GGSA and things like that. So I think you get out of it what you put into it, and I feel like I'm trying to put a lot into it so that when I leave here, I can say, I did have a good experience in that genetics program because I helped to shape it.
Yeah, and I mean, the podcast itself being such a new thing when we got here, we didn't get in on the ground floor of it, but we got here pretty soon afterwards, and I'm like you, I feel like, improving science communication is a good thing, and maybe getting rid of some of the misconceptions people have about science as a whole. And so are there any misconceptions you can think of about graduate school that you have found to be untrue since you got here? Or rather, maybe not untrue, but not quite the way you were expecting it to be.
I mean, I feel like a lot of it kind of comes off as the stereotype of, it's like a Shark Tank where everyone's kind of vying for top dog spot. I'm mixing all these animals into this metaphor, but where it's not as cutthroat as some of the other. It's not nearly as cutthroat, let me put it that way, as some of the other programs that I was looking at, in terms of, I don't want to get scooped, so I'm going to keep my research to myself. I feel like Texas A&M, that's probably the one thing that probably opened my eyes, was that Texas A&M is very overall open to collaboration. And they want scientists from different fields to be interacting with each other because, like you were saying earlier, it does promote different ways of thinking. So I think Texas A&M does a great job of that, and the Aggie network in general is kind of like proof positive that those connections do last after school, and that's due to the fact that the Aggies put such a emphasis on those interpersonal connections.
Yeah. So what are you hoping to do after graduate school?
So that's become a bigger question mark as the longer we've been in our program. I came in wanting to go and stay in academia after this, so I would go the postdoc, assistant professor route. I love teaching. Grading, no, but teaching, yes. I like being able to pass on something that I'm passionate about to someone who might not have the slightest idea of what's going on in their own bodies or in their own cells. I like being able to break it down for people and get that light bulb to go off. That was one of the most rewarding experiences teaching for the genetics lab, was when the kid that was just struggling finally gets it. So I thought that was the route that I wanted to go. After a year or so of being in this program, I saw that the PIs were locked away in their offices writing grant proposals or emails or going to committee meetings or what have you. It was a lot of the bureaucratic stuff that I saw my managers doing in industry. They're hardly ever putting gloves on. And the wet lab is what I really loved about science. I liked getting my hands dirty in a sense, not because I'm wearing gloves, but you get what I mean. And being, on the assay running floor, I guess, and finding those results and then interpreting those results and going from A to Z, rather than just the PI who says, okay, go do this and come back to me with the data, So now that I'm starting to think more about it, I'm leaning back towards going into industry again. With a PhD, it's possible that I could end up in an R&D program where I'm running a lab, which would be really cool. But also there's the alternative that, I might not want to pursue STEM after this, which is kind of scary to think about. But the longer I've been in the PhD program and going through the motions of, okay, now I got to write my paper and I got to present my data and things like that. Other options have been lingering. So we'll see what happens. But I definitely want to keep my options open.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't realize until I got here how many different ways there were to use a STEM degree. Science communication would have been something that I never considered because I thought, I just have to go get a degree in that to get some sort of experience. But I really like genetics. And so, being able to do this is pretty awesome. I like it a lot. But is there a particular avenue outside of just specific industry? Like, have you looked into any kind of science communication? Do you intend to use some of this later on?
Definitely. I really think it's a good skill to have, to be able to disseminate your information to any person that's willing to hear you out. So regardless of what I do in the future, I do want to have some kind of role in, let's say I'm producing data, I want to have some role in how that data is presented to the public. If I'm working for a company that is producing, let's say the gene therapy itself, I would definitely want to have a hand in making sure that information of what exactly this is going to do, what exactly the side effects might be, to the public or to the people that are getting it, because as we saw with the COVID vaccine, just the misinformation that goes around about things that are ultimately trying to help people can cause such a panic. And I think that gene therapy is and always has been a scary topic for people to talk about. I remember in undergrad, I was taking a communications class that was, basically geared towards how do we get you bio majors to talk about your research to people. And my professor couldn't answer my question of how do I tell people that designer babies aren't what my goal is, If I'm producing a gene therapy that's going to modify the genome of a person, that's essentially a designer baby. And how do I tell the world that this is going to be for the good and not for, nefarious purposes or whatever they might have? So I do think that it's an important thing, an important skill to keep working on throughout your career, on how can I break this down as easy as possible to someone who might not have gotten, a biology degree.
So straying from the research just a little bit, you said that you have a better work-life balance now that you're in grad school. What do you do outside of your work to, help keep yourself grounded and, keep your mental health to good,
right?
Essentially.
So this is one of the first times that I've lived on myself. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, so our house has always been packed full of people. And then once I was 18 and moved off to undergrad, it was roommates until Texas. So one of the things that I have gotten into the habit of doing is just doing adult things, like making sure my house is in order, my fridge is stocked, and my laundry is put away, and just making sure that my adult brain outside of work is organized, because once that starts lagging behind, everything else follows. So that's one thing that definitely keeps me sane. I also, right after I joined the lab, my lab manager offered for me to join her and her husband. They play Dungeons and Dragons. on a weekly basis, and they said, we're starting up a new campaign. Do you want to join? And I said, oh, sure. So now I'm playing a year-long campaign at this point. We're trying to wrap it up now. And that's been really good to just, for a few hours, get out of my head entirely and put it in somebody else's. So that's been really cool. And then just, hanging out with the cohort members, I think has really been one of the things that brought me through those first couple of months. I don't want to say trauma bonded, but, getting dumped into the same experience and having that relationship with them of, we're all going through something similar and are able to at least commiserate. There's not a lot of people outside of the program that would be able to do that, So it was just good to have that solid group of people to just, I can go to Autumn or Sarah and just go talk about my problems for 30 minutes and then feel that a little bit lighter.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of the same way. I think, I had a good first year, but there was definitely a lot going on, and that imposter syndrome just creeps in sometimes. And I think being able to talk to your cohort about it, or other people in the program, that definitely alleviates it a little bit, makes you feel better about yourself.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I didn't think I was hot stuff coming in because I had an industry background. I did think that I would be able to handle it well, because that was a stressful situation as well. To be, just working in general is not easy. But I see people in our cohort getting papers published, like sir behind the camera over there. And it's just, I feel that imposter syndrome for sure, where it's these young whippersnappers are already publishing, and I'm this old fart that's just toddling behind. I entered my lab maybe 3-4 months behind everybody else. Still trying to play catch up a little bit. I mean, yeah, you had to switch labs, so
yeah, I switched after about I think it was about 7 months in my first lab. But I mean, it was a great lab to work in, and they're doing really great things. It just didn't quite work with my schedule, and I mean that was something I had to learn when we were going through rotations and everything. Was you have to find a lab that works for your unique experience.
100%.
And so, me, I'm not going to age myself entirely, but I am not a traditionally aged student, and I've got a husband, and I have family responsibilities, and so I definitely get the struggle on that one. But is there any particular advice you would give to any incoming graduate students, not necessarily just STEM majors, but a graduate student in general?
I think something that a lot of first-year students have trouble doing is advocating for themselves. So I think this is another thing that taking a break from academia helped me realize, was that the PIs aren't, gods of the lab. They're not the end-all be-all of what occurs in the lab, or determine your own self-worth, I guess. So when I was an undergrad, I took everything that my PI said to heart. She said, "Oh, you're not ready for grad school yet? You should take some time off." I said, "Yes, sir." To my female PI. And I went into industry, but working in industry taught me that, these people that are older than me, had more experience than me, they're still people. And a lot of PIs, I think, get stuck in that mentality of, you're going to have to do what I went through during my PhD. Not as a hazing thing, but more of they think it builds character or whatever. I'm of the opinion that if you can optimize something, then it should be optimized. And if the PI doesn't see it that way, then I know that we're going to have some kind of conflict. But at the end of the day, I'm fighting for what I think is good science and what I would like to do in the lab. So during that rotation process, I was definitely keeping in mind, am I going to be able to do this for 5 years? Am I going to be able to work in this environment for 5 years? And if I can't, what can I do to propose changes? What can I do to help make improvements? So I'm not only advocating for myself, but also having to follow through with those commitments or those suggestions that I make. So I definitely think that that's something that first year students are kind of scared of doing, is going against the PI or seemingly thinking that they might know better. Obviously do it in a tactful way, and talking to other PIs that you're mentored by or other students on how to go about doing that is a great way to figure that out. But I do think that having that pushback is kind of important, especially at the beginning where you're setting those boundaries and setting those expectations.
Yeah, and being a grad student doing the particular work that you have, do you have undergrads that work underneath you?
Mm-hmm. So I have three great undergrads. They all, I have a freshman, a sophomore, and a junior, and they all have various goals for after grad school. One of them is a biochemical engineer. So he doesn't want to do anything neuro-based, but he is super interested in the confocal microscope that we use to image the brain slices that we take. My junior. My sophomore is a neuroscience major, so he wants to go into more of the behavioral aspect of things, and he's going to be running my mouse behavior. And then the freshman wants to go to medical school. So we're focusing with him more on the Alzheimer's disease aspect of the project and how our project can be clinically translated. And I am enjoying being a mentor to them and learning, how can I help make this a good experience for them, kind of how like my undergrad experience with research went, where my grad student was super understanding with me and walked me through all the protocols and everything, and was really hands-on. I'm trying to do the same thing for them, and it's been super rewarding so far. They've been doing great, producing great work, and helping me out a whole lot, especially with this last semester of classes wrapping up.
Oh, you're done with classes at this semester?
Man, this should be my last semester of classes, and then I should never have to take an exam again. And I'm just going to sleep a lot easier after this.
Yeah, I think I've got another year of classes planned, but that's because I'm really trying to dive into that bioinformatics stuff. And I mean, I appreciate the extra certifications that, we have the ability to get here, because I feel like that helps each of us tailor our particular situations to it. But you had mentioned that you originally wanted to stay in academia because you like the teaching. Do you feel like getting the opportunity to mentor some undergrad students maybe gives you some of that same feeling of?
Yeah. Passing on the knowledge to the next generation is always cool to me. Like I said earlier, I have 5 younger siblings, so I've always been in that teacher role of, okay, let me show you how this works, and I have to have the patience to understand that, someone like me who took super hard math classes isn't going to struggle as much with simple math as, some of my siblings did. So I've always had that practice of trying to not dumb things down, but simplify things to their level. And I do like doing that with my undergrads and showing them the ropes in terms of training them in the wet lab stuff. But I do enjoy the conceptual aspect a lot more. I think being able to walk through a pathway and have them all understand why, it goes from A to B and B to Z. It's really cool to see that in the classroom. And I don't really get that too much in the lab.
So outside of school, you've been in so many different places. How are you finding College Station itself, Texas as a whole?
It's very similar to Gainesville, Florida, where I did my undergrad, where it's kind of an isolated college town with not too much around it. And I'm trying to view it similarly to when I was at UF, where it was kind of just like this little vacuum that I could do my academia in without too much distraction. Granted, when you go looking for a distraction and you can't find one, it's kind of frustrating. But I mean, it's definitely helping me realize like what I like to do versus what I like to do in a group setting. Separating that has been pretty interesting because in undergrad, I feel like most people just hang out with their friends all the time because, if they're not in classes, you're hanging out. But as an adult, you're not really hanging with your buddies too much. So it's cool to have, the buddy time on the side. But finding out something that you can do by yourself and being okay with doing that is kind of what College Station has brought for me.
Yeah, I like that though. So do you go to any of our GGSA socials and check out those group activities?
I have gone. I do like getting to see everybody and outside of school especially. So that's not, oh, what do you have going on in lab? Oh, what do you have going on in lab? Like, back and forth about work things. I think we went to the Cove one time, and I don't know, anytime alcohol's involved, like, it's a good time. But getting to see everyone just, like, relax and float on the lazy river and not have to stress out about, the 5 plates that they ran yesterday that failed or whatever. And I do appreciate that our grad student association has such a good social committee that is able to coordinate that stuff.
Oh yeah, our committee is great. I absolutely adore them. So to finish this on out, is there anything you would like to convey to our viewers that we haven't covered already that you think that they should know?
I would say definitely don't be scared of trying different things out, whether that be during your undergraduate career, in between undergrad and grad school, if you want to take a semester or a year off, just to take time for yourself. I feel like COVID kind of drove that home for a lot of people, where it was like, let's stop and reevaluate what makes me motivated to get up in the morning. So I would definitely say don't settle on one thing and think that that's the end all be all if you don't get it. I interviewed for Hopkins genetics program 2 years in a row, and they said no 2 years in a row. And that was my dream school. That's what I, did my dream program. I wanted to be in it so bad. But now I'm here and I'm doing great, and I'm, still pursuing my goals. It's just not in the way that I thought I would. And I think the outcome's even going to be shifting after this. So I would definitely say keep an open mind and don't be afraid to try different things, because I wouldn't have, ended up here if I hadn't gone into industry first. And who knows what happened. I would have been probably my second year when COVID happened. And I couldn't imagine being right at where you're supposed to be taking off part of your project and just getting shut down by COVID. So I think everything happens for a reason, and it all usually works out. So I would say don't stress about it.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Again, everybody, this is Anthony Matarazzo, a second-year gene student here at A&M. Today's episode was hosted by me, Sarah Ingram, and produced by Aaron DeSalvio. This podcast is brought to you by the Texas A&M University Interdisciplinary Graduate Program in Genetics and Genomics. And if you have any questions about our program here at A&M, please feel free to email us at bluejeansandboots@gmail.com. Spelled just like this up here. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Genetics Podcast. Thank you for listening, and we hope you will tune in next time.